So I would say that one thing that I would highly encourage people to be conscientious about is to not get attached to a property and to use the most realistic approach they can. And I'll say this, the easier it is to analyze it, the less you're going to get attached to it probably. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Real Estate Crash Course. I am your host, Morgan Cole. Thank you for joining me today. I have, again, a special co-host. Kristen Lopez is joining me, and we're going to talk a little bit more about real estate, analyzing real estate, why you should consider analyzing real estate thoroughly when you buy it. And we're gonna have some fun. So in this case, Kristen's going to be kind of running the show. So take it away, Kristen.
All right, Morgan. Thank you so much for having me here today. Where I would like for us to focus and where I have some questions around is analyzing single family properties specifically. I think that there are some very much different points whenever you're analyzing single family, multifamily, and commercial. And I think today it would be great if we focused on a single family analysis first. So to kick us off, I'm curious, before the Discover platform was created, you had mentioned before that you had many spreadsheets that you used to analyze a property, but what were you looking for in those spreadsheets, and really how did you organize that data? Can you just give me some background there?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So, when you're using a spreadsheet to analyze real estate, you kind of need to get your thoughts on a page. Mm-hmm. So your thoughts might be, how much rent am I going to get, and how much times 12 does that turn into annual income? And then you need to think about vacancy and think to yourself, a lot of people just say, oh, I'm going to lose 1 month of vacancy every year. So they take off one of those months. And you need to come to what is called your effective rental income. So you have gross potential income, which is your total rent. You take away your vacancy and you have effective rental income. And that's your top line revenue that you have coming in. And then we need to put expenses on the page. So we would put property tax, property insurance, property management, leasing commissions, and then other things, maintenance. People account for what is specifically maintenance and what is specifically capital expenditures, like a roof, differently, but you need to put it on the page, whatever bucket you put that into. And any other expenses you might have, an HOA, if you're paying for utilities or anything else like that, that needs to be on the spreadsheet. The challenge that most people run into is that, first of all, if they're not real experienced, they might forget an expense. They might not have a line item on there that reminds them that they need to be thinking about the HOA, and it just slips by. They also probably don't have the ability to put in a growth factor in there. Mm-hmm. Like maybe the rent's going to go up every year. Your expenses are going to go up every year. So a lot of people don't build spreadsheets that take into consideration inflation and appreciation. And that's what you're looking for. I mean, your question was, why was I doing it like that back then? It's because I wanted to forecast the future. I wanted to figure out what our income was, what were our expenses, and how was that going to affect the property, and how was it going to perform for a few years?
I think that that's a very important point to focus on there because, I've spent quite a lot of time in the property management industry, and I would spend time talking to owners. And we have a term there, we'd call them accidental landlords,
sure,
where they're coming in, they didn't intend to invest in a property. And the biggest thing and the biggest question that they would ask me is, what do you charge for management? And they would assume that that would be their only expense that they are going to be paying for. So they're looking at that bottom line of what my rent is minus my management fee equals what I'm going to be making each year, which you called was that your effective rental income?
The effective is just taking away vacancy. Okay, so you're adding to the operating expenses.
Okay.
And when you add up your operating expenses and subtract those from your effective rental income, you're calculating your net operating income, or NOI. And NOI is what you take home before you pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, people just sit there and they already know, like they're doing it backwards. They think, okay, well, my mortgage is $1,200. I looked around and I think Zillow says I can rent it out for $2,000. So I got 800 coming my way. How much is this management company going to charge me? Oh, $185. So now I'm getting 615 left of my 800. But they're not taking into consideration. Maybe they're not. I'm not saying everybody's doing it wrong, but if you're not analyzing it, if you're not putting your numbers on a spreadsheet or into some calculator, you might not be thinking about the part of your mortgage that's not escrowed. Maybe you escrow tax but not insurance. Sure. So the insurance that you're paying for annually, but you're not thinking of it. HOA that you're paying directly. Maintenance, it's a new house. This thing's not going to break. I don't need to consider maintenance. Right. Okay, but the water heater is still going to go out in 10 years. The roof still needs to be replaced in 20 years. Yep. So there's things that you need to be taking into consideration. And if they don't bother you, if you just want to write the check when it comes, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you should still measure it.
Right.
You should still keep it on your mind.
And so for the investor out there who is thinking of getting into single family properties and they want to purchase their first investment property, is there a typical percentage that you would ask them to set aside for things like capital expenditures? Or is there like a savings account that you would recommend for your clients for them to just set aside for, oh my goodness, the water heater went out, or oh my goodness, the roof went out, or oh my goodness, we need a new HVAC system? How would you recommend for somebody to do that?
Yeah, a repair reserve is kind of the way that's expressed. You can call it different things, but it's a reserve that you're accruing each month to be able to say, hey, a water heater replacement, buying the water heater, paying someone to install it's going to cost me $1,200. I think it's going to happen in 10 years. So I need to put $10 away per month to be sure that in 10 years I have $1,200. Things like that. You need to think, hey, my carpet in my house, I'm going to have to replace it in 5 years. So let's be sure that I can afford $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever to replace the carpet. So there's things like that you can kind of itemize and say, okay, on a recurring schedule, I believe I should be putting away $125 a month so that as these things happen, I will put enough money away to pay for them.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So as someone is approaching a potential purchase of a property, these are all things that they need to be considering to know what their net operating income will be at the end of the year.
That's exactly right. And like I said, different people will consider one thing in maintenance and one thing a capital expenditure. And while we're not really covering that right now, capital expenditures are separate than operating expenses, and they do not affect your NOI. But you do need to be, figuring out what maintenance is and using it as a line item. And I talked when we talked on the last episode about realistic maintenance. It needs to be realistic. You can't just say, it's a brand new house, I don't think there's going to be a problem.
I've heard that so many times.
Yeah. You need to be thinking about how, well, there's a person in there that's not you who is now occupying the house. They might not be quite as gentle on things. Might not be their fault that something broke, but they might be using it a little more aggressively than you.
Sure.
And so you might need to think that you're going to be paying for things that are going to break, which you can't specifically blame the tenant, but you are not accustomed to those things breaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, real estate investing is a really great thing, but it's different when you hand your house over to somebody.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense because you do have to account for things. One of my favorite stories is I was talking to an investor and he said that it was absolutely ridiculous the amount of times that he had to replace his toilet seats because they kept breaking. And he was like, Kristen, I never would have expected that I needed to account for multiple toilet seats to be replaced as often as they were. And I was like, I guess that is something that it's unexpected and it comes up, but that is why you want to make sure that you're accounting for these things on the front end, knowing what you're jumping into.
That is exactly right. I mean, yeah, that's exactly right. And so, when we're talking about why you should be analyzing the deal, you should be analyzing the deal so that you can be conscientious about all of the expenses that are, assuming we're talking about income and expense portion of analyzing the deal, you need to be conscientious of income and expenses that are going to be coming your way. The net operating income is before the loan. And as I mentioned, a lot of people will say, well, my loan's $1,200 and my rent's $2,000. And so I'm making $800. I'm happy. That's $9,600 a year. Sure. If something broke, I would just write the check. But what if you're analyzing a house you already own and you're just trying to make sure that you can get by? Okay. You're not making a buying decision.
Right.
You're not choosing whether you should deploy more capital. You're just simply saying, does this thing look like I can break even? I already own it. And that's very simple. Okay. Like that's pretty simple. What if you're an investor who's looking to get their second house or their fifth house or their 10th house? And you're saying, well, there's a litany of houses out there. There's a ton of opportunity. Which one of these should I actually buy?
Right.
That's when you need to really be sharpening your pencil and saying, well, okay, yeah, let's take into consideration all these expenses.
Absolutely.
What if you looked in one neighborhood? What if you looked in two neighborhoods and they were going to have all the exact same expenses, except one of them had an expensive HOA and the other one didn't? Well, you would probably have more financial performance in the neighborhood that does not have an expensive HOA than the one that does. I don't mean to keep harping on HOAs. I'm just saying that that's one thing that, you need to have a mechanism that you can use when you say, I'm going to take my capital and I'm going to put it into a new house. Why should I buy this house and not that house?
Right. And so whenever you're looking at all of those factors, and if you are advising a client on an investment property, are there specific metrics or rate of returns or any other types of metrics that you're looking for to say, yes, this is a good property to purchase?
Yes. So you've got three metrics, which are the ones that people are using: cap rate, cash on cash, and IRR, internal rate of return. And the net operating income is then compared to the purchase price to arrive at the cap rate. The amount of money that you invest relative to the amount of money that the property generates after it pays a loan is the cash on cash. And the internal rate of return it's defined as the percent return that every dollar achieves per year while it is left in the investment, or something about like that. It's hard to define, and the definition doesn't help you understand it.
Sure.
It's a funny thing. Like if I just say the definition, it doesn't, you're not like, oh, aha, I totally understand that. So the thing about the internal rate of return is, I talked about how you need to be able to do a multi-year analysis, and you need to track how income's going to increase and expenses are going to increase. Well, the other thing that's going to happen is your home value is going to increase and your loan's going to amortize. IRR takes into consideration all the cash you put in at the purchase of the property, the cash you got out at every time that you were able to take cash out of the property, annual cash flow, and then the gain on the sale. And then it takes that and it puts it down to an equivalent annual return that you earned on that money. You don't just say, well, I bought it for $100,000, I sold it for $200,000, I made a 100% return. Well, if you achieved that in 1 year, yeah, you made a 100% return. But if it took you 11 years, you did not get a 100% return. I'm not even saying that if it took you 11 years, that's bad. I'm not saying it's good. How much cash flow did you get along the way? And what were your other opportunities?
So then with that, if a property had a decent cap rate, cash on cash was pretty good, and the IRR looked good as an initial analysis, does that automatically mean that we're going to have positive cash flow every single month?
No, because you have irregular events that happen that, yes, while we're saving $125 a month to take care of these large items, they may come at you at a speed that you weren't prepared for.
Right.
So you can analyze a property till you're blue in the face, but reality kicks in and it's not going to necessarily completely match your analysis.
Yeah.
Is there a situation you're thinking of, or a conversation you've had with somebody where you've experienced that they were surprised that something didn't go the way they expected it to? And
oh, absolutely. I mean, most of the time, whenever I'm speaking with somebody, the first thing that comes to mind is that they want positive cash flow. And that is, no matter what other metrics we can look at, no matter what I can show that the long-term value of owning this property is going to be in the positive for them, cash flow is king. That is what I hear from, I don't know, I'd say probably 80% of people that are looking at purchasing a single family property is they want the cash flow right away.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've experienced as well, that cash flow is what
Yeah.
we're looking for?
What's also interesting about, yes, cash flow for sure. But I don't really only talk to people about cash flow when they're buying a property. When I'm talking to someone about buying a property, we talk about appreciation and we talk about amortization, and we talk about cash flow.
Can we stop really quick? Can you just explain amortization quickly?
Amortization is the loan balance going down over time. The principal, the part of the loan payment that you make that goes towards principal reduction.
And typically if it's an investment, you're using OPM, other people's money.
That's exactly right. Yes. And so when you lever the property, when you utilize other people's money and you get a loan, hopefully your property is, paying an 8% cap rate, let's say, and you're borrowing money at 6%. So the spread on that, you're making money on the bank's money.
Yep.
Which can boost your cash flow. When people are looking at real estate, they definitely want to look at their cash flow, because they're thinking, hey, why would I be putting this money into this property if I'm not going to be getting something out of it? Why would I buy a $200,000 property, put $50,000 down if my manager is not going to also be sending me a $300 or $400 check every month?
Right.
But there are many reasons to buy real estate, and cash flow is one of them, but not the only reason.
Sure.
And the fact that after several years, the property is going to have gone up, 50 or 100,000 or more in value. Your $150,000 loan is going to go to 130, is going to go to 120, is going to go to 110. And the sum of all those things is what turns into the internal rate of return. And I have found that I have worked with my clients to look at the whole picture, which is nice. And we've grown from using spreadsheets to using the software we created to do that. But whenever anybody's upset, whenever anybody's calling their manager because they're mad, whenever anybody's firing their manager, it's cash flow. That's what it is. So yeah, people generally speaking, people are looking for and demanding positive cash flow consistently.
And that's usually on the second half, right? Once they own the property. At the beginning, we're actually taking into consideration all of the different analyses. Analyses.
Yeah, that one's always a funny one. Yeah.
All of the different metrics that can be run on a property is what we found in your experience.
Yeah. And why you should analyze the deal is so that you can measure multiple performance pieces of the property, but theoretically also hone in on the one that's important to you. So if you are, cash flow, if cash flow is the most important thing to you, then let's analyze all the houses we can and let's find the one that's going to give you cash flow. Again, if you're analyzing a home you already own, these are kind of nice to know things. But if you're thinking of investing more money, if you're thinking about buying your next investment property, if you do a thorough analysis on them, you'll be able to say, hey, in this area, they have lower taxes and no HOA. The rent is a little less, but I am netting more money. In this area over here, they have higher taxes and they have an HOA. The rent is slightly higher, but I'm also looking and I can see these properties appreciate more than the ones over there.
Sure.
Maybe, you know what? I guess I just want to break even. So I'm not demanding that I get cash flow because I want to go for the long-term play of appreciation if I'm over on that neighborhood over there. Whereas the first neighborhood, we're saying, no, I don't care about appreciation. Nothing is promised. I just want to know right now, how much cash flow am I going to get? But if we can analyze opportunities in both areas, then we can decide which one resonates with the buyer and we can make an informed decision.
Absolutely. And I think that it's interesting the different ways that people look at purchasing properties, where we have, I believe, the super analytical people that like to go in and look at all of the different analysis. And then we have people that just make decisions with their guts of like, yep, this feels like a good property. Now for those latter people that the details aren't as important to them, they're more like, this seems like a good idea. What are, like, at the most basic level, the things that somebody should be checking off of their list? Because I know we can run hundreds of analysis on a property, but for those people that are just drivers that just want to make a decision quickly, what are maybe like the 3 or 4 pieces of analysis that they should be checking off on their list?
That's a great question. So if I was going to do just a real simple overview, so let's go ahead and assume we're using Discover for purposes of this because it's going to give us
I think
all
that
of
that's
them.
the easiest way to look at something.
There you go. So let's just say we're using our software. We're on Discover. We're looking at a house. It's giving me, cap rate, cash on cash, IRR. It's also going to tell me my total investment amount. So that's that's step one.
Yes.
Purchase price, fine. Let's pay the right price, but we need to know what's our down payment, what are our closing costs and loan fees. So investment amount is going to be the first thing that anybody should be looking at. Do I have enough money to invest in this particular property?
That would be very important.
You might stop right here and go to another property.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would start right there. And then I would be looking around in the analysis and looking around in the area to size up. For me, houses, I'm looking at cash on cash.
Okay.
More than anything else initially. My first question is, what's the cash on cash looking like? A couple of years ago, the timing was actually really good to be buying houses because prices had not gone up a lot, but interest rates had come down a lot. And so you could find very good cash flow opportunities. You could get cheap money and the houses were not through the roof. But then house prices went through the roof.
Ooh, yes, they did.
People started to come out of their homes. They started to go look at more homes that they could buy. They took advantage of cheap money. And you got to the point that the loan, while it was at a 3.5% rate, the house was too expensive relative to the rental income. And that could adversely affect your cash flow. Fast forward to today, house prices in many areas have backed off of their peak. But interest rates are at a recent high, and that's causing negative cash flow. So in every event, the reason I'm mentioning cash flow is because step one, I need to figure out if I can buy this property. Can I write a check? And then step two is, if I write that check, am I going to have to keep writing more checks every month to make up for negative cash flow?
Sure.
Or is this property scheduled or estimated to generate money to me? After I had sized up the cash flow and evaluated if I thought this was a favorable opportunity for me, I would say whether I'm only looking at cash on cash or the actual monthly or annual cash flow, fine. Let's just put those in a bucket.
Okay.
IRR isn't probably going to vary wildly in one area. One neighborhood, we're using the same assumptions. We're assuming they're going to all appreciate at the same rate. The rent we're assuming is going to appreciate at the same rate. But if I was looking at multiple markets, this is where IRR would also come in. Okay. We could say, hey, I'm looking in Memphis where it's going to be maybe lower appreciation, and my IRR is going to be a little less, but my cash flow is going to be higher.
Sure.
If I'm looking in Nashville or Austin or, some Colorado, Utah, appreciation is probably going to be higher.
Right.
Cash flow is going to be less, and my IRR in those cases may be greater.
Absolutely.
So once I evaluated the size of the investment and if the cash flow was something I could tolerate, then I'd be searching around to say, where can I get real estate is a multi-year investment. So let's look at a multi-year metric. That's IRR.
Absolutely.
And once you move into IRR, you'd say, well, hey, this is interesting. I can get a 8% cash on cash and a 12% IRR in Memphis. But over in Nashville, I can get a 3% cash on cash, but a 14 or 15% IRR.
Right.
And if I don't need the cash flow to pay my bills, if I'm not looking to that to live, a 15% IRR is a greater return than an 11 or 12% IRR.
Absolutely. And so on that analysis side there, and I'm glad that you brought up multiple markets, because I think that a lot of people, especially first-time investors, feel paralyzed by the fact that where I live, it's too expensive for me to buy a house. It's too expensive for me to buy an investment property. So whenever looking at different areas, you brought up, figuring out which metrics are important to you. You shared the ones that are important to you, but I think that for an investor, it's figuring out which one means the most to me. Do I want the cash flow? Do I want the IRR? Do I want cash on cash? What means the most for me? Is it wise to purchase, and this is your opinion, do you feel that it's wise to purchase your first investment property in an out-of-state market?
Gosh. So I don't think I could put a blanket statement on that. I would say, I've owned a management company. I still own, my management company that doesn't do residential. Okay.
Sure.
So we have mobile home parks and RV parks and commercial. Someone has to manage the house.
Right.
Whether you self-manage or hire someone, management is taking place.
Mm-hmm.
There are a fair number of people in the world that just don't want to pay someone to do the thing that they think they can do themselves. And people do successfully self-manage. I mean, they definitely do. People also unsuccessfully self-manage, or the job gets a lot bigger than they expected it to be. So if you're going to self-manage, I would say getting out of state could be risky.
Sure.
If you have decided to hire a professional property manager, I think that the world should become your oyster.
Right.
I would. There's jokes about not making the biggest mistake in real estate, which is the mistake is to actually see the real estate that you're buying. What you want to do is call somebody up in Minnesota and say, "Hey, I discovered a property out there that meets all of my criteria. I want to buy it remotely and hire you to manage it."
Yep.
And there are people that do that all the time. And the cool thing about that is you are just using every opportunity in the US and you're hiring a professional manager and the job gets done.
Absolutely.
So I would say if you have decided that you're willing to hire a manager, and I will just say that I think you should, then I would be looking in the most profitable market, or the market that aligns with your goals the best. Mm-hmm. There's not one size fits all in this. There are people who couldn't live with themselves if the rental house that they were purchasing was not the same quality as the home that they live in.
Right.
Whether they couldn't bear to tell their friends that it didn't have quartzite countertops, or that they just couldn't imagine someone living in a home that's not the same as theirs.
Right.
Then you need to find the house that matches yours that you can turn into a rental. There are other people that say, hey, not everybody needs a house that includes XYZ. I want to provide a nice property to someone who's not seeking XYZ. Right. Go buy that and find it in the market where you can be successful. With a tool like we have, with Discover, you can look at properties across the US and all 50 states, and you could say, I'm going to buy this one in Washington and this one in Florida.
Yes.
And just go to the corners of the United States if you want to find the ones that meet your criteria.
Absolutely. And I think that a key point there, which you were alluding to, is when you own an investment property, you own a business. And with that, what I love about analysis is that it removes feelings from it. And like you said, if it is important to you that your tenants do have the best countertops and stainless steel appliances, well, great. That's what matters to you. And there is a bit of emotion added into that. If we're seeking, though, going out and making money, relying or chasing after those different metrics, and that is our goal, is to achieve a rate of IRR, to achieve cash flow, to achieve cash on cash, whatever it is that we're searching, that's a business. And that is a business decision. And our business decisions shouldn't be led by necessarily our feelings. So relying on the analysis to find you the best market, to find you what is going to return to you what you're looking for, you want to rely on an analysis.
And I think that that is utilized more now than it was in the recent past.
Sure.
But it is still not. I had a meeting with the guy a few years ago. I was showing him our software, and he was just telling me how I was crazy that these houses were going to have the expenses that they were going to have.
Right.
And I was like, man, I said, why? I said, why are you so adamant that, we're not going to have these? And it was, well, it's a new house. And I said, what do you do then? How do you size this up? And he said, and he works with investors. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, what I do is I get on the Stewart Title app, and I type in the address, and it gives me the estimated mortgage payment, and then we look at how much it's going to rent for, and if it makes money, then we buy it. Well, he's being short-sighted. He's not
Right.
sizing everything up. And so I said, I actually opened up my rental software and I said, let me show you some houses I've been managing for like 7 or 8 years. I showed him, I said, sure enough, hey, look, here's a year where we had zero maintenance. Like we literally spent $0, didn't even fix a toilet fill valve, right? And then the next year, all we had to do was replace the weather stripping on the back door. So that was a breeze. And then the next year we replaced the roof, the fence, and the AC coil.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. It was $0. It was $132, and then it was $15,000.
Right.
And the average on those 3 years was $5,000. Now I'm not going to probably replace the roof and the AC coil and the fence the next year, but let's give these things a 10-year life or something. And now we're right back to $2,000 or $3,000 a year of total budget for maintenance and capital expenditures. And so just being thorough in taking the whole picture into mind is important.
Yes.
I remember when I first got started in the purchase in the mobile homes, I had a client that was looking for a high cap rate, and we analyzed some houses and we agreed that we were finding them that were about a 12% or more cap rate, and he bought them. Well, I didn't know then what I know now, and I didn't know how much it was going to cost to maintain those houses. He made money on all of the houses. He paid the right price and we leased them out for the right amount of money. But when you add the actual expenses in there, the real cap rate was less.
Right.
And so he was happy to buy the houses at a 12% fake cap rate. And he was also happy to own the houses at a 7 or 8% real cap rate.
Gotcha.
And so it doesn't mean that when you analyze a house, you're going to suddenly say, oh, well, I can't buy this because it doesn't achieve, such and so. What it allows you to do is take all the opportunities that you're presented with and do a apples to apples comparison and figure out which one meets your criteria.
Absolutely. Okay. So as we're wrapping this up, Morgan, what are some final thoughts that you have on analyzing a property that we want to give to the listener of what they should be keeping in mind when they're approaching an analysis for a property?
So, you shouldn't buy an investment property without analyzing it, and you shouldn't rely on the analysis to be the end all decision maker. I think when you look at a property, you need to think, okay, the cash on cash for this property is 15%, but is it still a price that I would like to pay for it? Look at everything. Like look at all of the numbers on the page. Don't just adjust the numbers or hone in on one thing that can make it fit into the box that you're trying to make it fit into.
Sure.
Did you have to raise the rent by $150 to make it achieve your goals? If the answer to that is yes, and you can't really get the $150 of extra rent, then you should just move on to the next one.
Yep.
So I would say that one thing that I would highly encourage people to be conscientious about is to not get attached to a property and to use the most realistic approach they can. And I'll say this, the easier it is to analyze it, the less you're going to get attached to it probably.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that the biggest thing that I'm taking away is figuring out which metric is most important to me as an investor.
Yeah.
And then also making sure to take in the whole picture and making sure to account for what is going to happen. It's not if, it's when it is going to happen, and making sure that I'm looking at rates of return and I'm looking at what it actually looks like based on an entire story, not just on the first year, not just on the second year, but 10 years, 15 years, what's going to have to be replaced.
That's exactly right. And I think, when I first started out, my spreadsheet could only do the first year.
Yep.
And it could only do the first hypothetical year. And now we use a tool that can give us all 30 years of a house looking into the future. I say all 30, like you're going to own it for 30 years. But it can give you a 30-year forward-looking analysis. And as you mentioned, look 10 years, 15 years from now and think, how does this thing pan out in the future? There's also times when you might conscientiously purchase a property that's going to lose money for the first 2 or 3 years because of how good the decade after that is going to be. And so it's just use the tools that you have available to you. Use the property manager that is 5 states away that you have available to you to help you accomplish your goals. You said what you said was people, should they buy a property where they live or should they only buy a property where they live? And with the information age and technology and all the things we have, I see no reason why you should only buy properties where you live.
Right.
So yeah, just approach it with your eyes open. Don't get too fixated on one thing. Find the thing that resonates with you.
Yeah.
Don't get too fixated on it. Look at everything and be sure that everything is something that you think you can live with. And when you're analyzing properties, do it in a uniform manner. Don't reduce this expense and add it to another one. Be realistic about that kind of stuff.
Very wise words, Morgan. Very
Excellent.
wise words.
Love it. Love it. So, well, thank you for talking me through that, Kristen.
Thank you for sharing all of those golden nuggets of information, Morgan, because you gave me things to think about that I had not yet thought about when approaching a single family investment. And I think that the analysis feature of it and making sure we're looking at the whole picture is important for people to enter into as they're looking to invest in single family properties.
You bet. So we're looking forward to putting out more of these and covering more in depth some of these topics on the next few episodes.
Absolutely. And if you are looking for an analysis tool, Discover.com has an analysis tool that can analyze any property in all 50 states. And it goes in depth, as Morgan said, for 30 years. So to be able to look at the entire picture of a property. So you can head over to www.discover.com.